Hello again everybody, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be all about teen dating abuse and violence. My name is Tracey Maxfield. I'm a retired nurse, author, peer specialist, and stop bullying and mental health advocate and educator. So in the earlier videos I've done, you'll know that February is extremely significant because it's Black History Month or African American Heritage Month. But it is also Teen Dating Abuse Awareness Month. That's a little bit of a mouthful. Teen Dating Abuse, TDA. For the older adults, it's actually called IPV, Intimate Partner Violence, but I think the two terms can be used interchangeably. They mean the same thing. You are married to, living with, or dating someone who is abusive. Now, teen dating violence actually affects millions and millions of teenagers globally. And I think there's going to be a lot of parents and adults who are going to shake their head and say, no, impossible. But actually, statistics are showing that teen dating violence is actually on the increase and has become a very serious problem. Because what we're finding is that teenagers who abuse their partner, whether it's in a heterosexual or a same-sex relationship, are more likely to go on to be adult abusers throughout life unless the issue is dealt with appropriately. Now, I'll go on to that a little bit later, but first of all, I'm just going to share with you some facts. So, teen dating abuse, I think you can liken it to bullying. Except the difference is that you're actually in a relationship with someone. Now, teen dating abuse can be psychological or emotional, it can be physical, it can be sexual, and it can also be stalking. And the teen abuse obviously can be in person, but it can also be cyber abuse. And by that, obviously, it can be threats and inflammatory comments, but it could also be outing a person on social media if you're in a same-sex relationship, and it could also be sending maybe personal and intimate texts or photographs of a sexual nature. And so that in itself is a significant problem. Now, what's really scary is that even though there is an increasing number of teenagers, both male and female, that are being directly impacted by dating violence, very few of them actually report it. And what we found, especially in teenage girls, is that many of them think that the behavior, the abusive behavior, is actually a sign that their partner loves them and they adore them and they really like them, and they think that actually the abuse and the jealousy and the threats and the control is a way of expressing love. Now, we know that this is so not true, but obviously it shows that there is a need for greater education of teenagers, not only about bullying and mental health and mental illness and suicide, but also about the effect of violence, teen dating violence. Now, some facts I'm going to share with you is the CDC, which is the Center of Disease Control in the United States, conducted their Youth Risk Behavior Survey in combination with the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey. And what they found was that 1 in 15 males and 1 in 11 females experienced physical dating violence. They also found, on average, 1 in 36 males and 1 in 9 females experienced sexual dating violence. This is now broken down into more specific facts. So, for example, 1 in 11 teenagers experienced prolonged, ongoing, deliberate physical abuse. 1 in 5 teenagers experience repeated emotional abuse. 1 in 3 repeated sexual abuse and violence. 1 in 3 teenagers in an abusive relationship never told anyone. 2 out of 3 parents say that abuse is not a problem with their teenager. 80% of girls who are physically abused continue to date their abuser. 1 in 4 teenagers report that they are pressured to spend time only with the person they're going out with, their abuser. And in 1 in 5 girls has said that when they have threatened to break up with a boyfriend, that boyfriend has actually threatened violence. So this is scary. I mean, we're talking about 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids here. What's hard to believe is that we now have children actually under the age of 10 that are now dating. 11, 12, 13, they're in serious relationships. Even some of them are engaging in sexual relationships, which in itself is very scary given that our brains and bodies are continuing to grow and develop. And we haven't even got the mental and the social skills to even deal with this onslaught of intense emotions and pressures. Now, first of all, I'm going to tell you about the teens that are at risk. Then I'm going to follow on to talk a little bit about LGBTQ before we go on to talk about the dating abuser. So the teens most at risk, regardless of male or female, are those that usually belong to a racial group or a sexual minority group. Other factors include maybe someone that's had poor self-esteem, low confidence, maybe a teenager who participates in risky behaviours or who starts dating at a very early age, has a friend who is a dating abuser, believes dating violence is appropriate. This is scary. A teenager who engages in early sexual activity is also at an increased risk of dating abuse and violence. Other factors include history of childhood abuse and trauma, think ACEs, exposure to harsh parenting or parental neglect. Teenager who maybe has a physical or a learning disability is at risk. Teenager who exhibits behavioral problems or aggressive, angry behavior and manners. A teenager who uses emotional disengagement, confrontation or blaming as coping strategies. And last but not least, teenager who may have maladaptive or antisocial type behaviors. So think of control disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, to name some. Now, LGBTQ sadly experience the most dating abuse and violence, and I'm going to have to read from my little list here because I couldn't remember every single fact, but LGBTQ, when we think of LGBTQ, we think of bullying. They are definitely at increased risk of victimization and of bullying, but also dating violence. And some of you may be shaking your head going, why would the same-sex partner engage in violence? It's actually no different than heterosexual relationships. The only difference is that in an LGBTQ relationship, the abuser can actually threaten to out the other person, especially if their parents are not aware that they're in a same-sex relationship. And that very threat of exposing the person to their peers, to school friends, to parents, is a reason why many of them actually continue to stay with the abuser and just endure the abuse, which is sexual, physical, and psychosocial and emotional. So 42 42.8% of LGBTQ teens experience dating abuse and violence, compared to 29% heterosexual. Transgender teens actually experience the most dating violence. That rate is 88.9%. That is significantly high. Sexual victimization of LGBTQ teens is 42.8% compared to 23.2% in heterosexual relationship, and psychological abuse in LGBTQ teens is only slightly higher. It's 59% compared to 46% in heterosexual teens. But again, this is another factor that we need to really pay attention to. And so what is true is that anyone, any age, anywhere, anytime, any race, religion, ethnicity, sexuality, gender can experience abuse, and more so dating abuse when they're in a relationship with someone. So who is the dating abuser? Well, what research has shown is that many of the behaviours associated with perpetrating violence are evident before 10 years of age, and early physical aggression is actually one of the strongest predictors for later involvement in violent behaviour. And think ODD and CD, conduct disorder in block 5, and disruptive mood dysregulation disorder in block 10. Videos the same, 10 and 5, if you want to review those again. Other risk factors that contribute to the likelihood of a teenager becoming a perpetrator of dating abuse and violence include vulnerability to peer pressure, lack of parental supervision and support, low self-esteem and depression, possible substance abuse and or a mental disorder, as I just mentioned, narcissistic personality disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, reactive attachment disorder, conduct disorder are the most common. So many teenagers, and remember these are boys and girls, can have poor and immature communication skills. They may have anger management issues. They may be involved in risky behaviours, so criminal activity, sexual behaviours, belong to a gang. They may witness abuse at home or in the community and think that that's an expression of love or that it's perfectly normal. They may have themselves experienced childhood abuse, neglect, maltreatment, and they may be conditioned to believe that violence, threats, intimidation, inappropriate sexual behaviors is actually an acceptable expression of love. Now, what happens if you are the boy or the girl, or even if you identify as gender neutral and you're in a relationship which is abusive and violent? What can happen? Well, the first thing that's going to happen is that it's going to decrease your morale, your confidence, your self-esteem. It's going to actually increase your likelihood of developing depression and or anxiety. We know that some teenagers who are repeatedly abused can engage in behaviors such as lying, stealing, theft, self-harm, very common. They may turn to drugs and alcohol, or they may become more sexually promiscuous. Suicidal ideation is very, very common, and there is a very high risk of suicide if they have an entire emotional onslaught of physical, sexual, psychological, plus cyber dating abuse. Other things is that if this is not dealt with and it's not reported and the teenager does not get appropriate counseling and support, they're at higher risk of victimization when they actually go to college, and that will then continue throughout life. It's not uncommon, as we've said, that the dating abuser, if not helped and treated, will go on to become an adult abuser. Similarly, the victim, the teenager who is abused, if nothing is done, they will recognize this as a pattern of behavior that they will then continue in their efforts to find the person that loves them. And it's funny because you attract what you perceive as correct and what you put out there. And so it's not unusual, actually. I've spoken to many women who are in their 40s and 50s who were actually abused as a teenager, and they seem to attract the same people over and over again. Now, I've mentioned that 2 out of 3 parents say that dating violence is not a problem for their child or teenager, but 82% of parents, when there was a poll, actually said that they would not even know the signs and symptoms if their teenager, in fact, was being abused, unless the teenager came and told them directly. So let's review some of the warning signs of an abusive relationship. So the first thing is your partner, extreme jealousy, insecurity, possessiveness, repeatedly checking your phone, your texts, your emails without your permission, begins to isolate you from friends and family, will make false accusations, tell lies about you, will become easily angered and agitated at something that you may say or do, may begin physically, sexually hurting you via emails, cyber, for want of a better word, as well as physically. Will tell you what to do, who to see, what to wear, what to eat, may follow you everywhere, wants to know what you're doing every minute of every day, constantly putting you down and criticizing you is in front of others and when you're one-on-one. And gaslighting, very, very common. Gaslighting is when someone says and does things to make you think that you're in the wrong and that you are losing your mind. And gaslighting is becoming a very, very common phrase that's now being used and is actually identified with narcissistic personality disorder, which was discussed a few videos ago, actually, and that in itself is on the increase as well. So how can we help? I think the first thing is that we need to send a message to all teenagers that if you're involved in an abusive relationship, you must tell someone. Tell a friend, tell a trusted adult, a school counselor. I mean, I urge you to actually tell your parents or a parent, but if you really don't want to do that for whatever reasons may be going on at home, please talk to a teacher or a trusted adult or another family member. You need to document the abuse. Days, times, what happened. Take pictures. If there's been physical abuse, take pictures of the scratches, the cuts or the bruises. Print off and take screenshots of any pictures or comments that have been posted online. As a teenager, as a parent, as a friend, family member, know the warning signs that teenagers is potentially involved in an abusive relationship. You want to remain calm, be responsive, not reactive. So easy for you as a parent to suddenly say, no one's touching my kid, go over to talk to the parents, and that doesn't go well. Talk with your teenager. You need to listen, you need to be there, be non-judgmental, be understanding and supportive. You have to believe whatever they're saying, even if the abuser is the high school jock and everyone loves him and he's awesome and you can't believe because he's always so polite and kind around you. If your teenager comes to you and says, he is hitting me, he is threatening me, he is stalking me, you must believe your teenager. You must establish that relationship of trust so they'll continue to open up to you, and obviously support and show love. You need to explain to your teenager that it is not their fault and that these behaviors are actually quite unhealthy. And at that point, it's good maybe to discuss what is healthy behaviors in a relationship. Even if you have a friend or a family member that you could use and say, okay, this is a good example of what dating is like. Related even maybe to your dating experience, but they need to understand what is healthy and what is not healthy dating behaviours. You do not threaten or give them an ultimatum. I'm going to the police, I'm going to your teachers, you need to end this relationship. What you need to do is sit down, listen, talk with your teenager and start working on the next plan of action. Because obviously, yes, your teenager needs help, but the dating abuser also needs help. You have to decide how you're going to approach that. Now, if there's been actual violence and very serious threats, then the police will have to be involved. But the first thing is you need to be there and support your kid. So ask your teenager what they want to do, how they want to strategize, offer guidance and support. Don't laugh or intimidate them. Don't say that, you can't do that, that's silly, that's stupid. Just sit down and say to them, okay, well, maybe that won't work. Why don't we look at another option? Would this help? And get them to problem solve, because this is what's going to help make them better people. Encourage your teenager to talk with a peer advocate or school counsellor. And I think other things is to discuss that you're actually quite concerned for their safety. And so if they're going to continue to see the abuser, how are you going to ensure that they are safe and that they're going to be able to handle themselves in that situation? If the teenager, and hopefully the teenager does agree to end the relationship, strategize a plan, because you don't want to put their lives at risk. Because we know that some teenagers, quote unquote, can go off the deep end. I think other things to do is provide some resources and websites on dating violence, which are relevant specifically to teenagers, which your teenager can go and read about. And these include heterosexual, racial groups, and also LGBTQ. And actually on the accompanying article that goes with this, I've got the websites. Other things is maybe talk to your church or your community activity center or the school. Current evidence shows that if socio-emotional programs for youth are introduced, that can actually prevent intimate partner violence and dating abuse. And so the programs are, for example, Safe Dates, the fourth R, Strategies for a Healthy Teen Relationship, Green Dot, and Coaching Boys into Men. These are just some. Because I think if teens all sit down and listen together, then they may recognize that even if they're not in an abusive relationship, maybe a friend is, and they can reach out and offer support and help there. So this has been quite a long video, but there is a lot of information out there, because, as I said before, teen dating abuse and violence is actually way more serious than we ever once imagined, and it is in epidemic proportions. So please refer to my website, www.traceymaxfield.com, for the actual article, because on there it's got more information on the different social emotional youth programs for teen dating violence, plus additional websites and information that I haven't covered here because I don't want to overwhelm you. Next time, it'll be blog number 36. It'll be the month of March, and we will be discussing histrionic personality disorder in children and teenagers. Very, very interesting disorder. So join me then, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel.